So today we're very pleased to welcome Andrew Reeves and Hadyn Williams from BACP, who are here to talk about the place of counselling research in the profession. Now, over the past decade or so, it seems that research has become really quite an important part of the profession. And I'd like to start by just asking why you think that is. Why is research becoming so much more an important thing for us?
Okay, shall I start? I'd like to start by challenging the premise of the question, although I understand what it is you're asking. Because I would assert that research has been crucial to counselling all the time.
Right.
So when you go back to the early analysts, Freud, Jung, etc., I mean, they were magnificent researchers. If you look at people like Rogers, he was a magnificent researcher. True. None of this was worked out on the back of an envelope. No. You know, it was done systematically and with care and with thought. So I think it's useful to keep that in mind, in that actually research has always been a part of the development of counselling and psychotherapy. I think the question is why are we talking about research in the way we're now talking about it, which I think is around the development of evidence-based practice. And I think I think lots of things come from that question.
Do you want to say a little bit about that phrase, evidence-based practice? Because that's a really important phrase.
It is. It is an important phrase, and there are other phrases that are equally important too, I think. So evidence-based practice is about the systematic development of evidence that then informs the delivery of a treatment. Now, we wouldn't refer to counselling as a treatment, but the philosophy of evidence-based practice comes from medicine, from a medical model. So the empirical, the systematic research into a form of treatment for a condition, and then the delivery of that treatment for that condition. That's been transposed across to the psychological therapies. And so by evidence-based practice, we might think that if somebody comes to see a therapist who has anxiety, for example, or depression, what treatments have been seen through evidence to be most effective to treat that condition. So you can see the kind of medical discourse.
Yes, and those would be called evidence-based treatments, I think.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. I think there are other phrases that are important and interesting too. So you can turn it around and talk about practice-based evidence, which I think is different again, because practice-based evidence is actually evidence that we develop from doing. So if
from doing the counselling or the psychotherapy.
Doing counselling or psychotherapy. So if I'm seeing clients over a period of time, there might be a number of things that I can do to capture aspects of that systematically to learn from what's happening. That might be quantitatively, so using measures and numbers and doing statistical analysis, or it might be qualitative. It might be routinely asking the client about their experience of therapy or what it was they found helpful and analysing that. And what happens with practice-based evidence is that we take what it is we learn from practice and develop an evidence base. I think both are important. Yeah, I think evidence-based practice and practice-based evidence are both important. My hunch is that the practitioners might be more comfortable with the concept of practice-based evidence because it's rooted in what they do as practitioners. The reason why I think over the last decade or so, going back to your question, Anthony, why that's become so crucial is because, going back to the evidence-based practice, because the kind of the discourse of medicine and the principles of medicine have increasingly been applied to the psychological therapies, we're having to demonstrate that what we do works. Yeah.
That it's effective.
Yeah. I don't work as a counsellor simply because I like it. Yeah. That if you come to me with particular difficulties in your life, that I'm going to do things with you, that we're going to work in a way, and that what I'm going to do, there is evidence that that's going to help you, rather than just I'm going to enjoy the process. Yeah.
And it's an evidence that's been developed amongst, in effect, a group of peers.
if it's practice-based evidence, it might be developed across hundreds of therapists who come together to share their data, to share their information. Or it might come from things like randomized control trials, which is kind of known as the gold standard of evidence, which is very predominant in medicine. So you have the treatment, the counselling, or in medicine, the drug, and you have the people who aren't going to receive that, and you effectively look at who does better. Do you do better by having the treatment or by not having the treatment at all? That's much more complex than that, but in its most accessible form, that's what it means. So you might have treatments in the psychological therapies that are developed from evidence from randomized control trials. So cognitive behavioral therapy draws quite a lot on randomized control trials. Or you might have treatments that draw from practice, so using outcome measures and process measures, and shared across large groups of practitioners. There are things called practice research networks that BACP have been very committed to supporting. And what a practice research network is a collection of practitioners who join into a group. So it might be around supervision, it might be around counselling in schools or things like that.
And they're looking to research it, that's what you're saying?
Research and share
so
their
they'd
data.
be researching supervision, they'd be researching counselling in schools. So it's a group of people coming together in the practice-based research to develop key findings, to find
collect
out
data
what's effective.
and share data. Anonymously, obviously, not giving client information, but sharing data. It's important because if we want counselling to be available to as many people as possible, if we want counselling to be a viable option, if we want counselling to be funded, so for many people it might be free at point of delivery, if we want the people who use services, if we want the public to have faith and trust in the profession, it's important that we can articulate this is seen to be helpful. It might not be helpful to every person all of the time, but as a generality, this is seen to be helpful to people, so that we can build trust, we can build competency, and that we can demonstrate efficacy. That this is effective for people.
It also equates to being ethical. That if we are delivering a service which is costly either to the person who we're working directly with, or through our employer, or through the NHS, or through third sector, and myriad other places, there's a real ethical component of being sure that what we do actually is making a difference. And research, from wherever that's coming, whether that's from the research down or from practice up into research, wherever it's coming, informs the quality of what we're doing, that we know what we're doing has an impact, then we're acting ethically. Ethically for our client, ethically for those, often the public funding, which is enabling the work to take place. So it's also part of the ethics of professional development, that it is an ethical requirement that as a practitioner, I need to be sure that I'm not sitting back on my laurels and relying upon what I learned 20 years ago, which may not actually be the best of practice.
So what we're talking about, the value of research, is really it's about looking to encourage people to bring important findings or to participate in something like a practitioner. What was it? Practitioner network?
Practice research network.
Practice research network.
Yeah.
So to kind of bring the research findings or to participate in actual research as part of what they're doing as practitioners. And the ethical side of it is that it's, if you're not doing that, then are you really doing the best that you can for your client?
Absolutely. And they're very creative. The practice research networks, they are, we know them as PRNs. That's right, it's difficult to say the full words of the acronym, forgive me. One that springs immediately to mind is working with children and young people. And they're very creative forums, out of which are growing dedicated toolkits that enable practitioners then to take the skills, take the toolkit into their clinical practice and to be more effective for the people they're working with. So that's the very exciting part of research, when you see research translated into direct work with your client for the better.
Having some conclusions, some findings, and that getting out there, and
yes,
practitioners doing things a bit differently as a result.
And it doesn't just inform therapy at that macro level. In the setting in which I work, we use outcome measures. So we ask clients to complete a form at the beginning of the therapy, at the end of the therapy, but also several times during the therapy. And what I find fascinating is just how much that contributes to the therapeutic process, because it gives me and the client an opportunity to.
So what you're saying is you're getting feedback from your client during the counselling process, is that right?
And my client is getting feedback from themselves. So
they're reflecting on it themselves.
Yeah. So if I'm using what is a quantitative measure, which I know lots of counsellors are very anxious about numbers, a client can complete a form. It will take me 15, 20 seconds to input it on a computer. I get a chart up and I sit next to the computer with the client.
Right.
I explain it to them.
So it's really collaborative.
And I've had clients in tears looking at it. And clients saying, I didn't realise I was as bad as that. And, it's not standalone information. It's part of the relational process. But it can open therapeutic doors as well as contributing to a more macro understanding of therapeutic process.
And that phenomena itself has been researched to show that the engaging in that level of feeding back with a client has an enormously influential impact upon the speed of development within the therapeutic relationship, embeds the relationship, and impacts upon the speed of growth and development.
And also, I think from my vague memory of some conference presentation, it's also about fewer people drop out.
Yes,
from
you
it as
engage
well.
much more. The DNA rate is reduced as a consequence.
Because when people aren't feeling so good about it, they've got a relatively easy way to feed that back, so that the counsellor, the practitioner, can respond.
Yes.
Well, yes, it's because research also tells us that counsellors are notoriously bad at judging how well therapy is going. So we can think therapy is going really well and we're really hearing the client. And when the client is asked, they can say, it's awful, I don't feel my therapist is listening to me at all. The 90% of us...
That sounds really important. What you just said there sounds really important.
90% of us think that we're in the top 10% of therapists. So we're notoriously bad at reading the process of the relationship and notoriously bad at reading the process of ourselves, and it can help us reflect.
It's also a very uncomfortable truth, what you just said there.
Yeah.
It's basically saying that we like to think of ourselves as better than we actually are.
Yeah.
In general, on the average.
As a generality, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So quite something to think about, that, something to reflect on.